for being here and giving us some time to respond. I am Minority Leader Lisa Demuth, serving in the House. As a response to what we heard from our governor this evening, one of the things that was woefully missing that I fully expected to hear was an acknowledgement of the loss of Pope County Deputy Sheriff Josh Owen, who was killed in the line of duty on Saturday. And that was definitely missing, and I would have thought that we would have heard that. But as far as the details and what was brought forward from our governor, on the campaign trail last summer and fall, what we heard from Minnesotans is that Minnesotans were looking for tax relief, and knowing that we had a $17.5 billion surplus, Minnesotans were expecting to see some of that earlier in session as soon as we got back, more of it. And one of the things that they were also looking for was the full elimination of tax on Social Security. And as a reminder, you've heard from us that we're one of only 11 states that actually still tax that. That was something that was missing this evening in what we heard. We know that with a $72 billion budget proposed this year, that is a record 40% increase. What that says to Minnesotans is that even though we ended last biennium with a $17.5 billion surplus, it wasn't enough, and we were going to increase that going forward. Some of the things that have already been proposed this legislative session is $9.5 billion in tax increases, and a lot of those are regressive tax increases. Metro area sales tax to fund transit projects, a 75-cent delivery tax on all retail deliveries and prepared food, massive hikes in license tab fees, and even raising fees for what we in Minnesota enjoy doing, visiting our state parks, fishing, and boating. So while the Democrats are on their record spending spree, again, you are not hearing dramatic tax relief that is being proposed. Another area that we've been talking about in years prior and is still missing from any provisions is funding for our nursing homes. We hear from nursing homes across the state that they are short workers, that they have beds that they cannot fill because of the lack of workers and the lack of funding. Yet we did not hear that. In the proposed budget, what I can tell you is that there is $4 million that is being proposed for nursing home funding out of $72 billion. We did hear from the governor tonight that there would be $550 million proposed for law enforcement across the state, and he referenced that that was going to be record funding. What I can tell you is our state office building has a proposal that has been approved for a renovation and an expansion of $500 million. So while the governor says for public safety, $550 million across the state is enough, I can tell you compared to just one building on this campus at $500 million, that pales in comparison. So again, with a record budget surplus of $17.5 billion, returning that to Minnesotans, reducing government and the costs is what our Minnesota residents are looking for.
Well, thank you, Representative Demuth. Appreciate that. I think you wrapped it up very good. I think another point is that Ron DeSantis is probably off his Christmas card list at this point. So we just finished up with the State of the State address, which was one of the most unique ones that I've seen. It was like being at a Democrat pep rally with the single party control, just the amount of euphemisms and doublespeak and red herrings that were thrown out that really didn't talk about the needs of Minnesotans. What we saw was a national campaign speech out there ignoring the needs of Minnesotans across the state. You know, Representative Demuth hit on a number of the issues that we're seeing, but the theme is this is broken promises. You know, when Democrats were on the campaign trail, what did we hear about? It was about tax relief. It was about law enforcement. It was about education. And yet in each of those three categories, we've seen a backward step. Let's take education, for example. The number of mandates that are going on to schools right now, even with an increase in funding, puts them back per pupil, somewhere around $1,000 to $1,700 per pupil. These are big issues. This is not what Minnesotans voted for. They voted that so that their kids would have a genuine education in Minnesota schools. Talk about tax relief. Look, they worked on or promised Social Security benefit tax relief. And now what you're seeing in the budget is a proposal for $10 billion worth of bills of tax increases. $17.5 billion surplus wasn't enough for Democrats. They had to overspend that by another $10 billion. That's the proposals that are out there right now. So we could also talk a little bit about law enforcement as well. So when Minnesotans are scared to go downtown in cities like Minneapolis and St. Paul, what's the solution? They've reduced sentencing for juveniles that are charged as adults. And we've seen the horrific cases and the reasons why juveniles are charged as adults. And yet the solution is to let them out early, put them on the streets, make our cities less safe. Folks, this was a big step backwards. I was hoping for a unified message tonight, something that all Minnesotans could get behind. However, it seems the ambitions of the governor are national, and we're starting to forget about the needs of Minnesotans. So I'm open to questions. Representative Demuth, if you have anything further to follow up on.
Could you talk a little bit about calling this a national campaign speech? There were quite a few references to national stuff. What do you suspect is going on there, if anything?
I can't speculate on that, but I was actually quite shocked at the amount of national, perspective that he came across with. So I wanted to hear about Minnesota's needs. I wanted to hear about that, but we kept hearing about Florida and different states that apparently he might be running against in the future. I'm not sure how that's going to work out, but I thought that was very interesting, his perspective.
We saw a couple of moments where the DFL was all standing up, giving standing ovations, the GOP largely sitting, remaining silent. A couple that I want to highlight and just kind of see if you guys have some insight on. One of those was child tax credit, and the other one was the whole kind of spiel on gun issues. Can you guys kind of weigh in on that?
Sure. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about some of the guns. Do you want to go for that too?
I'll do the gun.
Okay.
If you wanna take the
So there's a number of proposals out there, right, for tax credit, for children, for families, for different ways of handling the surplus that we have, and how do we get that back to Minnesotans? We clearly have a difference on how we want to do that and how much we want to give back. So it's not that we don't support getting money back to families. In fact, we do. However, the way that the governor is doing it is a very partisan way of trying to do that with just single-party control. And as you saw, I mean, over and over again, it was just the Democrats that were standing with the governor, and it really felt like, hey, we want to work across the aisle on these issues, and yet over and over again this session, we've been denied that ability to work with Democrats on issues as important as getting families tax relief.
I agree with Leader Johnson on the tax relief areas. As far as us sitting during what was mentioned on the gun control, what I can tell you is what Republicans and most Minnesotans are looking for is they are looking for criminals to be held accountable and keeping the guns out of criminals' hands to start. We have got to start there is enforcing what we already have on the books. And when it comes to public safety in general, the increase on carjacking and the fact that we are not even charging criminals and with fentanyl as far as what we need to be doing and holding more criminals accountable on the drug charges, that's where we need to start before we have further conversations.
Can I ask you about the public safety money? Because it felt like the audience for that message was not you guys, it was his own party, correct? Because those dollars are not in the budgets, at least that I can find.
Do you want to touch on that?
Sure, we can touch on that.
Yeah.
So he talked a little bit about the $500 million for law enforcement, which isn't in either bill in both the House and the Senate. So I'm not sure where that number was coming from, whether that was a proposal that he had given earlier or not, but it clearly isn't within the bills that are currently being passed off the floors.
Could I ask you to comment on one of his statements? I mean, up here we're seeing just a classic ding-dong battle about role of government, basically, I think is what, and he said, government exists not to meddle in your life, but to make it easier. Could you both react to that?
I would be happy to. You know, I think one way that government can make our lives easier is to reduce taxes. And so Minnesotans would be able to keep more of the money that they are earning and spend it in the way that they see best for their family. when we know that we, again, have that $17.5 billion surplus, yet that's not enough, and we're looking for more later on. Minnesotans are facing challenges within their own budgets in the current economy. So to make it easier for Minnesotans to afford what they need to do, we need to reduce the size of government, we need to reduce government spending, just like Minnesotans have to change what they do. And as far as affordable childcare and some of the things that I know I've worked on in the past, as you heard some of the ideas of making sure that people would have childcare. What I can tell you is with the stabilization grants that we had in the past, and now I believe they're gonna have a different name. We didn't hear that tonight, but they're gonna have a different name. Those stabilization grants actually accounted for maybe a loss from 2021 till now, a loss of maybe one child care center across the state. But 700 family child care providers left that industry. And we depend on them in greater Minnesota and in the metro area. Family child care providers, centers, we need it all. But when we are having when we're putting roadblocks in where people can't stay in that industry and serve the families that they need to, families have trouble, they can't get to work, and that does not make their lives easier. So reducing taxes, less regulation, and making sure that families can do for themselves what they need to do.
Peter Johnson?
Sure. Did I get that right? You called it a ding-dong battle?
Well, so
I'm gonna put that in my notes and use that in my next speech. I like that
That's a
one.
20th century expression, so, sorry.
No, I appreciate that. And I think Representative Demuth, you hit it right on the head there. One of the big issues that we see is that 30% growth in government. So when the governor is talking about, hey, we want to get government out of your life, the irony is that right now we're building 30% more government. That's more bureaucracy, more councils, more red tape, more taxation to support that. I mean, a great example is the paid family medical leave bill that the Democrats are proposing. Republicans have a great free market system that we want to make sure that businesses and families can buy into. There's no bureaucracy, it's cheap, you can do it with a business that fits. Yet they want to build a 400-person bureaucracy, tax everyday Minnesotans' paychecks and businesses, really cutting into our ability to freely, do business in this state. And so the whole idea that we're trying to get, that the governor's trying to get government out of people's lives is, I mean, that's just classic doublespeak. If you want to look at it, they are growing it by 30%. Do not forget that. That's what their proposal is.
One of the things we did see both sides of the aisle rise on was making Juneteenth a state holiday. Could you guys kind of weigh in on that and why you guys put your backing behind that?
Sure, absolutely. I think that was an area that we can agree on. It's already been done. It's in law, and it was an area that we could definitely agree on and move forward.
Senator Johnson, as the next final weeks of session take shape, there are still some kind of outstanding things that the Democrats seem divided on. Maybe guns is one of them. That's been a holdout. Marijuana is unclear its course in the Senate, and that might be by nature of the one-seat majority for Democrats. Can you speak to at all the ways Republicans might be talking to some of those potential DFL defectors? Because you wield more power with that narrow majority in that sense.
Right. No, we've worked very hard to, try to build those relationships across the aisle with our Democrat counterparts and ones who will be willing to work with us. And we really value that relationship because we represent 50% of Minnesota, right? Senate Republicans do. And so we're working hard to build those relationships. It's been very disappointing, the traction that we've been given within the committees and the floor. If you'll notice, most of our amendments, the substantive amendments that would help Minnesotans across the state, that would make these bills more bipartisan, have been denied over and over again. One exception that I think is an example of, how we can work together is Senator Hoffman's Human Services bill, where he actually proactively worked with Republicans, and we had a very, very strong bill going forward. And yet most of the proposals don't follow that model. So I'm hoping the Democrats will start doing that more, but up till this point, it's been very dry for any sort of bipartisanship on those bills.
Anything new on bonding?
We are still hopeful on the bonding. That's something that we Senate Republicans have been very interested in from the very beginning. We'd like to see a bonding bill, and we just want to make sure that it's done prudently and then with some tax relief and other issues that Minnesotans have been asking for.
But there's no new developments or,
Not at present.
okay, thanks.
Seeing that the tax bill didn't have the full repeal of Social Security income tax that you guys were looking for, is there a path forward for the bonding bill?
Yeah, so you're looking at the House tax bill that came out, so, you know, we're still having discussions with Senator Rast, you know, asking her to include some of those issues in there, but it's gonna be, it'll have to be part of a global deal at the end of the day.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys, appreciate your time.